Welcome to AIW Empowers interview series. I'm so happy to welcome our guest today, Melissa Esmeralda. Thank you for joining us today, Melissa. How are you?
Great. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm good, thank you. It's my pleasure. So let's just dive right into your journey. Can you describe your current job?
I am a conversion copywriter and a marketing strategist.
That sounds really interesting. We're going to get deeper into it later because I do want to hear more about what that is exactly. But let's talk about your career path a little bit more before. Can you tell me about what you call your quarter life crisis and how that led you here to where you are now?
Well, growing up, I loved writing. It's something I've done a lot just for fun. Like I would fill up little notebooks with like fake stories or like journal entries and stuff, but I didn't know how to make a career out of it. Like I thought maybe it was just like an aspect of a certain job. And when I was halfway through college, I ended up working for an attorney, so I ended up becoming a paralegal, and I did that for 8 years. And initially I was really excited because I thought like, oh, this is like a good job. Like I've learned a lot, which I did, but I was in such denial for a long time that I didn't actually enjoy the work. And for a while, I thought, well, maybe it's just the area of law that I'm in. So I went from family law to personal injury. I did civil litigation, insurance defense. But it was becoming clear, like the more I moved on to a different job, that it was me and I just didn't enjoy the work. And it made me feel really guilty because when I was at my last firm, I was at a big firm in downtown Phoenix. I was making great money for a paralegal, great benefits. Like that was my goal for a while, but I still didn't enjoy it. And I had a bunch of other things going on in my life, and it it was like a hard thing to kind of like sit down and realize like, okay, like I have to make a change because I contemplated for a while, but because I was a paralegal for so long, I just kind of assumed I couldn't really get into anywhere else without having some type of experience. And everybody knows when you're first running out on anything, it's really hard to get that initial experience. So I had to make some really tough changes. Eventually, I quit my job. I moved. I got into copywriting by accident. I got a Facebook ad for it, which is ironic because that is literally copywriting, and that's what brought me to it. But it was like a masterclass video, I think it was, for this copywriting program called Write Your Way to Freedom. And right away I was like, oh yeah, sure. Like I'd love to do something like this. So I invested in the program, and as I'm going through it and like learning the techniques and stuff, I realized a lot of the techniques are similar to things I knew how to do already. I just didn't have a name for them because it was a little bit different. It's just something that because I've written so much. So it didn't seem like a big jump to go from paralegal to copywriter. There's just a lot that kind of needs to happen in between. So it was eventually I quit being a paralegal and I took a sales job for a little bit because it was an extremely stressful job. I was working about 10 hours a day. I was getting up like at 3:34 in the morning sometimes to like go to the gym, try to do like some copywriting stuff. And I was trying to play rugby at the same time still too, and it just wasn't working out. Um, so when I was at my sales job, the goal was to quit by the end of the year and then go into copywriting full time. And luckily, my main client at the time, they mentioned to me that they had more work for me, that it was going to replace what I was currently making on my full-time job. So I was like, yeah, of course, of course I want more work. So coincidentally, I ended up quitting on my birthday, which is really cool. So I was super excited, but then I didn't hear from them for like 3 weeks. So I reached out to them, and it turns out that the company had sold. So I was living alone at the time. So it was a really big shock, and it was a really big first lesson. So even though that was very stressful, it was still what I needed to do. Like I still needed to quit my job at some point because there's a huge difference between working a full-time job and trying to start a business at the same time rather than just doing the business stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine the stress of having all of those things happening at the same time. Would you consider any of those parts of your journey to be a mistake? Is there anything that you look back on and wish that you had done differently?
A little bit. I don't know if I would necessarily classify them as mistakes. It's more so I just wish I could have, in a way, believed in myself more, I guess, because like I've never doubted that I'm a good writer. Copywriting is different than traditional writing, even fiction writing, which is a lot of what I did. But as an introvert, and a lot of copywriters are introverts, we get in our own way a lot. And we're usually our own biggest problem. And I have a terrible habit of thinking, well, I can't do X, Y, and Z until I do A, B, and C. So I always think, well, I have to have a website. I have to do like X amount of experience in this. I have to do this business development. And then I can go out and start looking for clients. And it just doesn't really work that way. Like you still, because like life is still happening. You still have to pay your bills and stuff. So I wish I could have done that a little bit sooner and figured out exactly like specifically like what direction I wanted to go in regards to niche and deliverable, because I experimented in a couple different avenues and it just wasn't as profitable as I thought it would be. So I'm really excited now that I'm heading like in a really great direction. Like I love the clients that I'm working with, but like I also wish I could have found that out like a year ago or a year and a half ago. It would have saved me a lot of headaches.
I imagine, yes. And do you think there's a bit of perfectionism in there? You know, you mentioned you wanting to get to a certain point or do certain things before you move on to the next step. And I completely relate to that. Wanting to have, you know, certain ducks in a row before we feel like you can move
Yep,
forward, but
exactly.
it's holding our own selves back at the same time.
Yeah, I was in a copywriting group that I'm in. Someone mentioned the other day, she said she might have called it fancy procrastination. But basically what it is like, you know, you have to do this big thing. Say it is like cold pitching potential clients, which is something you don't want to do, but you know, it's really important and you have to do it at some point. So instead of working on it right now, you end up doing like business development, for example, or like making finishing touches on a project, which are things you do need to do, but you're doing it to stay away from that other big thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of it is perfectionism. And I just have this, like, I know imposter syndrome evolves and stuff, but I've always had this fear of someone asking me, well, can you give me an example of X, Y, and Z? And it's something that I just don't have because I'm not going to lie to them, but you also don't want to give like a super vague answer. And like, luckily that's never happened. I've always been trying to prepare for that just in case.
Yeah, it's just pragmatism, right? And just trying to make
Mhm.
sure you have something just in case.
Yeah, like I really always want to like look professional and like sound like I know what I'm talking about because like because like, you tend to get in your own way a lot as introverts, at least for me. You don't realize how much you know until you're talking to someone about it. Because for you, it's almost like second nature because like it's something you do a lot. But other people are like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, well, yeah. I thought it's like you almost think everybody else knows it, but they don't because like they have a very different career path than you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just to flip that a little bit, what do you consider your biggest success factor at this point in your life?
That's a great question. I think generally is that I've been very fortunate to be able to do this full time. And even though like it is very stressful, like being an entrepreneur, because not everything is consistent all the time, I am still very happy that I'm able to do this full time. Like, even though it is difficult, I still enjoy it. And I've never considered going back to a regular job. Um, I mean, like maybe part-time, like contract work is a little bit different, but like a full-time job where I'm in office and I'm gonna interacting with people, it's just very different. Like working for yourself is so satisfying and you learn a lot about yourself. Like in a way, it really highlights your strengths, but at the same time, it really amplifies your weaknesses too. Like the things you don't want to do. Well, that's why your business isn't growing in this area because you feel insecure about it. But this is why you're good at other things in your business, for example, because those are things that you like doing. So you really have to learn to kind of keep yourself in check.
Right. And have you found as being a business owner and having this big career change that you've had to make certain sacrifices?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the easily by far the most painful one is rugby.
Right.
I often say like rugby is like one of the great loves of my life. I got into it when I was in high school. I was always a runner, so like mostly track and cross country, but there is nothing to do in the middle of the season. I didn't know what rugby was, but there was an announcement over the school board saying there's a rugby team starting at the school. If you're interested, go to this room at this time. So like, okay, I'll go. I don't know what it is. So I brought this girl with me who was a foreign exchange student, and we get there and it's all guys because it's supposed to be a boys team.
It's,
So we ended up joining the boys team. I was not involved for very long because I'm not a big player. I'm like 5'3", like 115 pounds. So by like rugby standards, that is very small. And especially like going up against boys, but like it was enough of an introduction to it. Like I fell in love with it right away. So I was involved in it on and off for at least 10 years, but like I've had a ton of injuries. My body still definitely hurts sometimes, but I've had really great opportunities. Like I played in a couple of World Cups, like I won a national championship. I've been in nationals a lot. So I met some really cool people. So I do not regret playing whatsoever, but it was a huge distraction to how much I disliked my career. And I know that's why I stuck with it for a long time. So initially I thought, well, maybe I'll just take the season off and I'll be able to play rugby a little bit more often once everything picks up again. But the thing is, you can't really step away from your business ever for that long unless we have like a team of employees and everything. So it felt really weird. I felt like I was like rebranding myself in a way because I've always been Melissa the rugby player, and it's like, well, Melissa the copywriter, who's that? It felt very weird to like now like I show up as like I still maybe post like some rugby things every once in a while, but it's primarily just like talking about my business and copywriting, and the imposter syndrome has really shown up for me in that way because I know what I do is valuable and I know the information that I provide is also valuable, but you just feel kind of obnoxious just like promoting yourself and stuff. And like I know eventually it gets easier, but I also know it's a necessary sacrifice. As much as I do miss playing, it's really hard needing to be fit every single day of the year, traveling on a whim and spending, say, $500 on a flight to go to this random tournament and stuff. So like it's not just the money, a lot of it is the time. So I know that's time that I've used to put into my business, and it's been absolutely worth it. Like as much as I miss it, I've already done a lot with it. So it was kind of like the start of this new big era for me, if that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. Just like you said, it's a lot of rebranding. You're almost changing your persona and learning how to put yourself out there as a not a different person, but you've taken away a layer of yourself and showing
Yeah.
people a layer haven't necessarily met yet or interacted with.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm very interested in the fact that you played rugby for so long, like because a lot of athletes develop this really great sense of discipline and mental agility. How do you find that playing rugby has impacted your skills or, your career, whether positive or negative? But what were you able to kind of take from rugby and put into your career and your work life?
A lot. And I never thought that would come in handy. So when I saw that there's a lot of parallels between being an athlete, especially when you're preparing for like a really big tournament for like World Cup, for example, and running your own business, because it comes down to you, like you have to be very disciplined. You are going to face setbacks. It's okay to dwell on things for a bit, but at the end of the day, because it's just you have to learn to overcome that. And even though I tell people I'm like 95% introverted, a lot of people are surprised by that, especially when I go to networking events, because I think even for an introvert, I can sometimes come off as like a slightly intense, not like in a negative way. I just get kind of excited, and people just kind of misinterpret my personality a lot. But I think it's because like I'm not shy. I used to be. I was for a very long time, and then I gained some self-confidence. So the shyness is gone, but I'm still very introverted. So it it's just I don't know, like I just have been able to really trust myself and like trust my abilities, and I've never looked at something and thought like, oh, I'm not a good copywriter, I'm not a good business owner, like I'm not good enough, I can't do this. I always see it as like I don't know how to do that specific thing yet, but I'm going to find the resources to be able to do that certain things so I can hit my goals, because that's how it always was with rugby. Because if I didn't know how to do something, or if I want to work on my tackling or my kicking, like I would have to ask somebody and they would be able to provide a resource. So I've kind of have my mindset to be pretty similar, because no one's going to do things for you, but they can still help you out and point you in the right direction. But definitely like the resilience and being persistent go hand in hand. So those have been really, really big lessons.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's as much as perhaps it wasn't obvious when you were first starting out, that it transitioned you perhaps in a more gentle fashion into this new world where you have to find resources. I think it's probably something that people fear the most when they're transitioning or thinking of doing a transition is whether you have to start at the bottom or, you maybe not know anyone, is where do you get help? How can you find things without necessarily spending all this money? So what have you found to be the easiest way to get resources for your current career? And has that resilience, has that discipline and agility from rugby been a big factor in that?
Yeah, I think so. Initially, like I never really thought that community, I guess, would be a big thing because I've always been one of those players that loved playing more than the socializing. Not that I didn't like the socializing, it was just secondary to me because like I legitimately had so much fun playing. So with copywriting, I kind of started the same way. I joined a business program called the Copyright Accelerator specifically for copywriters, and I joined for the resources, but not really as much for the community, which is a big reason why a lot of people join. But it ended up being really useful because I ask a lot of questions, but I will ask them to people who I trust. So you kind of have to explore a little bit exactly like whatever your niche is, or if it's a certain deliverable that you have to find the right group because there's hundreds, millions of Facebook groups out there, but not all of them are great. So you do have to get pretty specific. But like if you have like groups of people that you've noticed are like a couple steps ahead of you, those are really great people to ask. Like there's a couple of copywriters that in particular that I have in mind that like I ask them as many questions as I can, like through like their communities or their courses or their programs, because they've probably already been through whatever I am currently going through, or they're probably a little bit further ahead of where I want to be. And accidentally, like I've ended up doing that with other copywriters too who are newer, because like I've never really considered myself like a seasoned copywriter or anything because I've never really thought about it. But a lot of newer copywriters, like they ask me questions. They're like, "Oh, your stuff looks great. Like, thank you so much for your response." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was like now I'm helping people out." Like it feels weird, but like it's really nice too. You just have to keep looking for the right type of people, because not every group is great. Some people are just like promoting their stuff, which is fine, but everything gets really flooded. And with copywriters too, and anyone like that's an online service provider, even though we provide a lot of value, there's a lot of ignorance as to how much that could cost, and a lot of people get taken advantage of, which I think is really sad.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of getting kind of a mentorship from others. It's really nice to hear that there is that kind of community out there. Do you find that the culture of copywriting as a whole is very community oriented and helpful? Is that something more niche?
I think generally it is pretty helpful, at least in the groups that I am, because even if you're a different niche, like if you're in SaaS or in health and wellness, for example, which are completely different niches, you're still probably writing the same types of copy. So there is going to be some type of overlap. Every once in a while you see some people like being a little bit short with somebody, but like I don't think it's very common. And I think it's because so many copywriters are introverted. They're just kind of trying to get to the point to get their question answered. But from what I've seen, like everyone's been pretty collaborative, which is really nice.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, in the terms of, or in the vein of mentorship, do you have any special words of warning or encouragement as a result of your experience?
That's a really great question. Words of warning, I know definitely AI right now is huge and a lot of people are worried. I don't think that anyone going into copywriting should necessarily be scared of AI. I've used AI before. I used ChatGPT because mostly for proofreading or just coming up with ideas for brainstorming. Like it's really great for brainstorming, but it doesn't do what a human does. But there are definitely companies out there who assume that copywriting is easy. So they think it's cheap. So they think that AI can do it. But even if you're using AI to create a blog, for example, you still have to know how to use it. And then you still have to edit it, because when you're using it, it still sounds like a robot because it's not human. So it's still going to take you a lot of time. So you have to be really careful about those types of people. I don't think we should necessarily fear AI. Like I still think you should give it a shot to go into copywriting, because there's so many avenues that you can go into. Like if a lot of people think it's blog writing, and that's how I started, and it turns out I hate writing blogs. I do them for a retainer client. I don't offer them as a service anymore, but it just felt like I was getting boxed in creatively. So I expanded into like sales pages and website copy and like email marketing, which is so much more fun to write for me. And that's one of the great things about copywriting, is like you can specialize in something for 5 years and then decide you just don't like it anymore and change direction completely, which is really nice. And I feel like that's pretty unique to this field, because even if you like writing a certain type of copy, for example, but you're just tired of this particular industry, you can switch to something else. So you can do whatever you want with it. So there's a lot of possibilities.
It's really interesting. It's more like AI is a tool, right? Not something to be feared, but something to learn, and then exploring your different avenues and kind of growing with the job, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there are definitely copywriters I think can, I don't want to say replace because that sounds mean, but there are some copywriters that think like if they're newer, they might not have like a clear grasp of what they're doing. So that's why AI seems so scary. But if you're using it to help you out, like I finished a sales page last week, so I was putting into chunks into Chat GPT. That's being very specific of saying it, proofread it. Let me know of any spelling or grammatical errors, and if any use of the passive voice, and if there's any suggestions that you have to make it clear, then let me know. And I was really surprised because I took a picture of it, because it ended up telling me your writing is very clear and concise and it's engaging and like all this stuff. I was like, wow, it's so nice. Like I didn't think I would get positive feedback, but like it ended up being helpful because like it had a couple of tips. So like I made a few changes. So but like, at the end of the day, like it can't write something like a sales page, for example, because there's so much research that goes into it. Because a big part of my process are research calls. So like for this client, he's a coach for parents who are with kids who are like pretty headstrong, like they're very intelligent, but they just seem to have hit a bit of a roadblock, and they're not very close to their parents anymore. So the parents are trying to help them out. So what I did, I talked to a couple of his past clients who've already been through his program. So even though you're only talking to them for like 10 or 20 minutes, just by listening, you pick up a lot of really great thoughts that can turn into really great pieces of copy. And it happens with clients all the time too. And they tell me like, oh, I'm not a writer. Like I know what I want to say, but like, I'm just not articulate. But I usually end up taking some of their words and then just expanding on it a little bit to create something that they really enjoy, which is really satisfying. But again, because you're having those research calls with an actual human being, they know this person very differently than something that AI has searched through on the internet, because that is nowhere to be found online. So that's why you're able to create copy that's very unique and individualized, but is still empathetic and connects to the readers. And that's not something that AI can do, because they're not going to go out and talk to an actual person.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like the human element really needs to be a part of it. I think it also speaks to how you work as well, where you're listening very closely to what the clients say, and you know how to kind of take their words and make it into something that speaks to not just what they said, but also what the program offers. And that's a really great skill.
Yeah, it's been really useful. I think anybody who is either a teacher, journalist do really well, or anyone who comes from some type of background where a lot of research is involved, they would do well as a copywriter, because if the research is done well, the writing is pretty easy, because you're basically assembling it in a way. You're just connecting all the pieces and putting everything together to create something that sounds like your client, that they really love, rather than just getting on your laptop and writing whatever comes to mind.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that, what you may like doing in copywriting right now might change in 5 years. You might want to explore something else. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
I would definitely love to have a small team of copywriters. I named my business MEO Marketing Group, MEO for my initials. I wanted to be MEO Marketing, but somebody already took that. So I added group to it. But I would like to actually have a team, like a virtual assistant, a couple of junior copywriters, because I realized I do like having some type of like that mentor role, even though I don't consider myself a mentor, but I know the value of it because like I've had mentors like throughout my career, which is extremely helpful. I would love to have some type of digital products and passive income, just because I never want to step away from my business completely. I know some people love to build something from the ground up, have a bunch of employees, and then they only do 20% of the work while their team does the rest. And I feel like that wouldn't be true to me because like I genuinely love writing, but I never want to do it for 40 hours a week, which is why I think it'll still be really fulfilling to still do like the writing aspect, probably like podcast interviews and stuff, etc. But still having a small team of copywriters that I really trust and be able to like help them out with their careers as well.
That sounds very, very, I want to say doable. That sounds like a logical next step, honestly, because, you're in a spot now where you're realizing that, you can be a mentor to a lot of people. And so I'm sure you could easily get some copywriters, some junior copywriters who would be happy to have you all the time, like 24/7 or almost for their work week, to have that kind of mentorship. I think it seems like it'd be very valuable for them. So going past the 5 to 10 years, what are your long-term goals? What is your blue sky? What do you see for your long term?
Long term, I haven't thought about too much past like 5 or 10 years from now, but I do want this to be a lifetime type of thing. Because I don't want to work until the day I die. Like I do want to build something that's sustainable. I would love to buy my mom a house. Like I know everybody says that, but my parents are immigrants. They're from El Salvador. So like I just don't want my mom having to work for the rest of her life. Like I know she's been wanting like a small house forever. Like she's like me, she's pretty simple. So like just to be able to do that, that'd be a huge thing off my bucket list.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Certain things that we hold to heart, right? That we want to
Yeah.
really check off at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
So your job is extremely creative. And as much as, you can be within your own bubble and just be doing research and whatnot, I'm sure it can be very taxing at sometimes. How do you create motivation for yourself?
I've never actually seen it that way. I think it's more so that I just know what I need to do. I am very much a to-do list type of person. And I have to have everything, like I have like a monthly goals, and then I break that down by the week, and then I break that down by the day, and I try to get as much done in the day as possible that's reasonable. I've been trying to be a bit better about having office hours, trying to only work between like 9 to 5, but usually something comes up, like I go to the gym or I have meetings that run longer and stuff like that. So I've been trying to be nicer to myself and not force myself to work 10, 12-hour days. Every once in a while I have to, like if I'm working on a big project, but if I'm tired, I finally stopped making myself work. I'll go take a nap for a while if I need to, just because there's no point in forcing yourself to run on a very low tank, because that's really going to affect your body. It's really going to affect your stress levels, and stress shows up in really unique ways. It can be something like you lose your appetite, or you start losing weight, or you start losing your hair. And like I would freak out if I ever started losing my hair.
I don't blame you.
It's mostly like I just try to keep myself very organized and have realistic goals for myself, because if you do keep the bar too high, it's very easy to get discouraged. And I've struggled with comparing myself to other copywriters, like if they have the same amount of experience as me or they're about the same age as me. I've gotten a lot better about it, but like initially it's like, oh well, I should be where they are right now, or like I should have done this, or like I should have realized like I shouldn't have done that. So you do have to learn to have a good relationship with yourself, because
Hmm.
nobody's going to make you do it. Like you still have to believe in yourself. And if you don't have the confidence in that, then you're probably not going to be able to get anywhere, and any type of setback is going to feel a lot worse. So, and I think it's completely okay to dwell on things for a little bit. Like I'm the type of person, like if I feel sad about something, for example, I have to let myself cry or feel whatever it is that I'm feeling, and then I'm over it. But if I try to bottle it up, then like it just like makes me very stressed out and like very anxious. So it is a bit of a learning curve. You do have to learn to be a good boss to yourself, because like I definitely still struggle with this. Like when I went to Hawaii for my birthday, like I tried really hard not to work, but I felt so obligated to. But it's not like anybody was telling me to, but it's hard to turn yourself off from everything completely. It is possible. It's just a little bit of a learning curve.
I like the way you said that, to be a good boss to yourself. I think that reflects that really well. And everything you said kind of reflects back something else I was going to ask, but you spoke about, which is, what work-life balance is to you. And it's not always the same. And it's not the same for anyone at all. I think 50-50 is not attainable for most people. And yeah, balancing it in a way that makes sense to you
Yeah.
is key. So, you spoke about sometimes having like to take a nap, or you go to the gym, or you force yourself to work on something. So I'm sure there's nothing that's really typical, but if we can kind of say it that way, what is a typical day or a typical week for you as you're working with clients?
It depends on the week, but I say on average, I try to only take client calls or discovery calls on between either Monday or Tuesday and Wednesday, because if you don't take control of your calendar, then your calendar kind of takes control of you.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to work on certain things when you have a meeting, so like a meeting at 8 and then one at 11:30, because initially you think, well, there's a big gap of time in between, like I'll still be able to get things done, but you kind of can't, because you get hungry or you're putting the dishes away. Something always comes up, and then the day is over and you're like, oh, I wasted the whole day. I got nothing done. So usually I try to do anything email related first thing in the morning. For some reason, I'm slow at typing out a concise email, because I want to be really thorough. And I know it takes me a long time, so I try to do that first. If I know I'm working on a client project, I will try to set aside an entire day to it, just because it's a lot easier to focus on this one big thing and then try to do a handful of smaller things and then work on the big project later, because I like to complete as much of it as I can, like project by project, rather than working on say 4 or 5 projects at a time, because it's just easier to get in character in a way. Like I always tell my clients that when I'm writing for them, like it's like writing for a different character, because it's not meant to sound like me, it's supposed to sound like them. But yeah, just a lot of emails, networking calls. I'm always in Google Drive and in Google Docs. And if for whatever reason I'm having a little bit of a slower week, I try to find other resources for whatever it is that I'm trying to learn next. So I'm not just sitting around feeling guilty for not doing anything, but it's still productive. Like business development is so important, and so is professional development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really I admire that you're using your spare time to do something that's still gonna advance your business. That's really admirable. Are there any big projects that you're working on now, or that you've finished, that you can tell us about without naming names, or anything identifiable? Is there something you can kind of give us as an example?
Yeah, that sales page project that I was just mentioning, it's a newer, so like this package is a little bit newer. Sales pages, for those that don't know, they're a monster piece of copy because they're so long. Usually they're for coaches, course creators, any individual or business owner that's selling some type of product or a service. So like a fitness weight loss program, for example, for this one, it was for a parenting program. So a sales page, usually it's gated, meaning that someone has to opt it into your funnel. So you have some type of lead magnet, some piece of free content to collect emails to send those individuals sales emails to try to inform them about your offer and what you're selling. So eventually, hopefully, that they become a client of yours. So the sales page has all that information. It has a bio, it has testimonials, it hits all the pain points, but does it in a way that doesn't feel cheesy or doesn't feel like it's very aggressive. Like I always tell people, like, those guys in the kiosks at the malls who are like they're selling like hair straighteners and stuff. Like I always avoid eye contact. I know they're going to try to straighten my hair. So it's like, that's what you're trying to avoid. Like you want to have basically a conversation with people through all your copy, but especially with something like a sales page, because it's so long, not everybody reads it the first time through. So there's a ton of strategy that goes into it. Like not just the headline, like you have to think of the stylization of the copy. Like some words are bolded, some are italicized, some are underlined, because you're trying to highlight the important things. So if they're just skimming through it, they're seeing the important points. So it's capturing their attention enough. They're like, oh, okay, this is probably something I actually need. So then they end up reading the entire thing. It answers all their objections. It has an FAQ section. There's just a lot of work that goes into it. And for all my sales page clients, I include a few bonus deliverables. So I usually have what's called a tripwire page. So it's an upsell page. So if you have, say, like a master class or some other type of bonus, if you pay in full or if you pay an extra $20, for example, like that's the copy that will go there. So that can help with conversions. I also include a welcome email for whatever their course or their program is. I include 2 social media ads if they want to split test, because split testing is when you have 2 ads, they're for the same thing, but they're written a little bit differently, or maybe the subject lines are different if it's through email. And you want to see which one performs better, because at the end of the day, you do want to capture emails and you do want to make sales. So I provide that as well. For this particular client, I rewrote a little bit of his website copy, just the beginning, because he has a really great offer, but it's not quite clear what he does when you initially go to your website. And when you go to someone's website, the number one reason people leave is because they don't understand what they do. So that's one of the things I explained to him. It's like, it has to be very clear what you do. Otherwise, your conversion rate's going to be really low. And it's not because you have a bad offer. It's because it needs to be clear about what you do. So it ended up being a big project. It was 25 pages and about 4,000 words, which might not sound like a lot, but because you're going back and forth so much and like doing all the strategy calls and you're reviewing your notes and you're pulling out like certain words that like really stand out to you, but elaborating them a little bit, like inserting the testimonials and like meeting with the client, it does take a couple of weeks, but it's really satisfying to put together. Because like once I read it, because you don't really think about how long it is or what you're saying until you're done, like you're reviewing and optimizing everything. It's like, oh, okay, this is pretty good. I actually really like it. So it's exciting to be able to put everything together and like hear clients' feedback from it. So that's mainly what I've been focusing on now, is just sales pages and launch copy. But I really love it. So that's why I'm really excited about this direction that I'm going in. It's primarily for coaches and course creators. It can be for a lot of different things, but it's just it's very fulfilling.
And how big is a typical project for you?
It depends on the project. If it's a sales page, usually they run between 2,500 words and up. The one I wrote before this is about 3,000. This one ended up being closer to 4 just because of the actual deliverables and stuff. But it is still pretty standard for a sales page. But like, because I did a lot of research on it too, because that's such a big part of it. Because it makes it so much easier to write, because you do want to make it sound like you're talking to the reader directly, which is the whole point of a target audience and why you want to get really specific, because that particular person, there's going to be a lot of them, but they're going to read your copy and say like, oh yeah, this person completely understands me. Like this is exactly what I'm going through. Because those are the type of people you want to work with, because they're really excited already, rather than someone that's just kind of shopping around and like kind of iffy. Like you want the good clients, and that's how you attract the good clients, is by writing copy that really connects with them, because you've gone so specific. And I know a lot of business owners are initially worried about that, because they think, well, I want to appeal to everybody rather than because I could help a lot of people, because it sounds kind of counterintuitive. but you can't appeal to everybody because it's going to be too generic. Like, people love feeling seen. They love feeling understood, because there's a lot of psychology that goes into writing copy that a lot of people don't initially realize. But if the copy does its job, like, you're not even going to notice the sales tactics. So that's one of the goals too.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So it's just expanded a bit, I think, of your area of expertise when you're like throwing in psychology in there as well, and observation. And so I just think that people listening who have those aspects in their lives or have those interests, to really think about how they can apply this even further.
Yeah.
So you absolutely love your job, so I'm not even going to ask you what you would do if you left. I'm going to ask you if your job was eliminated. All of a sudden, we no longer need the written word in terms of for sales. What would you feel most prepared to do with all the skills that you've acquired?
Oh man. I don't even know. I'd probably, because I know maybe at some point in the future, in the far future, like, AI will take over. But I think I would still want to do something with probably writing novels, but at the same time, I feel like, well, I mean, I still think it's something I could actually do, but I don't know if I can make a living off of it, which is the problem. Um, I love playing sports. I don't love watching them, which a lot of people find weird because I've played a lot of sports throughout my life. Oh, actually, you know what? I think I'd go back into playing my violin again. I played for a few years when I was a kid, and I was in a couple of symphonies, but then I just got way more into sports, and I moved, and there was just no orchestra around. It was just band. And like, I still enjoy it. I don't read music as quickly anymore because it's been so long. Like, if I could do something with that, I mean, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Violin looks, I mean, as someone who doesn't play instruments, it looks very difficult.
It's initially really difficult, because like reading music, it's like another language in a way, because you have to read like the sharps and you have to read the flats, and like some composers write things a different way. Like a D sharp can also be an A on the A string, but like you have to think about all that like while you're playing. And if it's been a while, like I was trying to play, I think it was last weekend, I was like, oh, I don't sound like I used to. But it's because I'm way out of practice. The first couple of years are definitely the hardest because it's very much a perfectionist instrument.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's just I find it really cool that you play that. I find it fascinating watching violinists. Um, Also because you can play, I mean, a lot of instruments can do that as well, but I mean with violin it just sounds so unique. So you can play classical, you can play like country, you can inject it into rock music. It's just so,
Yeah,
yeah, it's very multidimensional.
yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun.
Um, so diving back into your copywriting, so you talked a bit about how you got into it, but if you were to give someone advice, what do you feel is the best educational preparation to get into copywriting?
Any type of hands-on experience. I met with a newer copywriter about a month or two ago, and he's working at an agency, and he asked me, well, if there's anything different that you could do, like if you were to start over, what would it be? And I told him, like, honestly, I wish I would have had some type of agency experience. But when I started applying for copywriting jobs, somebody would hire me because I had zero experience. So I don't blame them. But then, like, as I gained more experience, I also knew that if I applied to an agency, they would see my website and they would see that it's me. So as a business owner, like, it doesn't really make sense to hire someone who's already doing the job full time, because they probably don't look like they're going to stay there for a long time. So like, it put me in kind of a weird position. I do love learning as I go, but because I had zero experience beforehand, it makes it a lot more overwhelming, I think, because you don't quite know which direction to go in because there's so many different directions. So it makes the growth very substantial, but at the same time, it makes it a little bit more difficult because at an agency, you're going to have people above you that, like senior copywriters, for example, that can give you some critiques, that can help you out a little bit, like you see about like their processes and stuff. But writing copy is very different to running a business, and nobody really teaches you how to do both. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really important, like I was saying earlier, to find the right resources because you don't know what you don't know. So you have to get really curious and ask a bunch of questions, and you have to constantly test things out, because otherwise you're just not going to grow. But like, I do think that could have saved me a lot of headaches if I had some type of agency experience before I jumped into it. But then after a while, I was like, oh, I have like a year, 2 years now, almost 3 years of experience. I mean, like I think I'm fine now, but like initially it makes it really scary because you think, oh, I can't get clients because like I don't have any experience. So like it makes it, I think, scarier and more difficult to grow, versus if you're in an agency or working for somebody, then you learn a lot faster. And I have seen a lot of successful copywriters do very well, and it's because they started in-house somewhere else first, which makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it definitely could have saved me a lot of time.
So, I mean, is it more like you get some kind of, I don't like calling it that, but um, I'm just gonna call it a safety net when you're working in an agency for experimentation, without as much impact.
Yeah, in a way, because in an agency, like they already have SOPs, like they already have very specific ways of doing things. So creatively, I'm assuming it's a little bit more difficult in a
Mm.
way, but it just seeing how they perform and how they conduct everything is a really great way to learn. Because when I had to do all my templates, all my SOPs, it took forever.
Mhm.
And I love business development, but like there's so much to think about. And
Yeah.
it kind of sets you back because you're constantly thinking, okay, like I need to do work on this, but like I also have to work on this and also have to work on this. And like as at an agency, everything's already done for you. So you can just focus on the copy while still observing and absorbing that information to apply it to your own business, if you do start one. But when you're on your own, you just constantly feel like you're running around and don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess it's more of oh goodness, it's more of like a quick start, right? You have to kind of just go out of the gate,
Yeah.
and without having anyone kind of holding, like pulling you along the side.
Yeah. Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
find though, because you mentioned creatively, it might have a negative impact because you have to follow certain guidelines. Do you find that that's been a positive then on your end, where you have a lot more freedom to just kind of delve into kind of your own techniques and your own way of thinking and approaching things?
Yeah, it just took me a little bit of time to figure out like what type of copy I like to write. Like I mentioned, I started out with blogs because that's, for some reason, that's just where most copywriters start. And most blogs optimize are SEO optimized, so search engine optimization. So they have certain keywords in the blog trying to rank for Google. And there's a lot of strategy that goes into SEO, because with something like chronic back pain, that's going to have millions of searches. So it's going to be almost impossible to rank for it unless you're WebMD, for example. But if you're a local business, you want to make it a little bit more specific to where you are. It could be like doctor's office in Phoenix, Arizona, for example, something that still relates to the keyword. They call them long tail keywords. So you do want to be strategic and place them in your copy in a way that sounds natural, but you also don't want to do something that's called keyword stuffing. So you don't want to do too much. So I love the strategy part of it, but with SEO, it can feel like you're being boxed in a little bit, because you still want to try to rank for that keyword. So like I have seen, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I've definitely seen blogs that are very high ranking on Google that are written really badly. And I know the only reason they ranked high is because they were able to rank for that keyword pretty early, or they probably worked for some big publication, but like they're still not written well, which is really unfortunate, because there's some people who write, they're like really talented writers, but maybe their strategy isn't great. And that's why I don't love SEO. I think it's really important for websites. So for website copy, I do that. But to do it for every single blog article that you write, it does make it a little bit more difficult, which is why I end up transitioning to emails and sales pages. Because I tell people all the time, email marketing is like the Wild West of marketing. So you can do whatever you want for the most part. Like as long as you're not ending up in spam, you can but yeah, as creative as you want, or it can be as weird as you want. Like I saw something on LinkedIn earlier, like right before I got on this call, that someone posted an email that they got. I forgot who they're subscribed to, but the subject line was unsubscribe in all caps. And then the preview text was something like, I'm going to sue you until, or like something along those lines, something about suing you. So he said that like, it ended up being something totally unrelated to what the subject line, the preview text was. And he's also copywriting, says something like, oh, well, what do you think about this? And I responded like, no, that's like, I would never do that. Like that's like the type of person that brags about their open rates, but they're using unethical tactics like that. Like you don't want to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely people out there that will do things like that to try to make themselves look better, but you still want to connect with your clients. Like I was saying earlier, like you want them to like you want them to trust you, and it does take time. But with something like emails, like you can add GIFs, or you can add a bunch of pictures, or you can send them an email every day, or just once a month, or just do a newsletter. So you can be really flexible with it and still do really well. Like some people, they have really great launches from a small list because they're pretty engaged with them, and they're trying to talk to them in a certain way that feels friendly and doesn't necessarily feel salesy, because people buy from brands that they like and brands that they trust. And if they see that you're an expert, they're a lot more likely to buy from you, which is another reason why I like writing sales pages, because you can inject so much personality of that particular brand or person to kind of highlight what makes them unique, what makes them so qualified, like why they care so much, why you should work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you have it all kind of in one place, because it's really hard to write for yourself. And I think a lot of people, like they know like they offer something great, but like it feels funny like trying to talk yourself up, I guess. So it's really satisfying to be able to create that for people and like be able to display that for others to see it as well.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned ethics. Brings me to my next question. From everything that you've observed in your time in copywriting and even studying for it, what problems would you say exist in the field?
I think generally it's not, well, I guess in a way it's like the copywriters themselves, like it it always frustrates me seeing job postings for usually for blog work. I try to stay from Upwork. I did get a couple of clients from there when I first started out, but they're notorious for being very low paying. But I've seen in a lot of Facebook groups, people say, oh, we're looking for a very experienced copywriter to write 5,000 words or something a month, but they'll pay like 5 cents a word, which is very, very little for like the amount of work that they expect. But some people really want the work and they'll still take those jobs, which I think is unethical on the employer's end. And I don't think it's necessarily unethical on the copywriter's end. Like I understand people want to get paid for work that they do, but like you should get paid at a fair rate. Like it's not sustainable. And you're gonna end up probably really upset that you can't make as much as you want, because it's very time consuming to write all those words. So that's definitely a big one. I know lately there's been a big trend in marketing about more ethical sales. There are definitely segments of people generally in like in the sales and marketing world where I don't want to say like it's deceiving. Like like an easy example is when you're on YouTube and you get ads for passive income, for example, and they tell you to click here, but like in the video, in the ad itself, in the YouTube video, they don't necessarily say what it is. They're just telling you it's easy. So you click the link, it takes you to this, they ask you for your email, it takes you to this video, it won't tell you how long the video is. They spent 45 minutes talking about like all the success, like it's easy, blah, 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 but like they still don't necessarily tell you what it is that you need to do until the very end. And it usually turns out like you have to pay money, or it's kind of sleazy. Like I was watching one the other day about, it's like Amazon book I don't know if it's considered reselling, but essentially what it is, you sell books on Kindle and you hire someone to write the book and you hire someone to design the book, but you're the one selling it, so you're the one who gets to profit from it. So, and they called it a cheap professional, which is such an oxymoron, because to write a book is very time consuming. It's a ton of work, and they should be paid fairly, and same with the designer. But I'm assuming they're not, because they're saying it's affordable, and like if you already don't have a whole lot of money, it just came off as really sleazy to me. And like I know that works for some people, because if you're paying for these ads, eventually somebody's gonna want in on it. And if they end up sounding like some type of course, I don't remember exactly what it was, but like that type of marketing really bothers me, because it feels deceiving. I think it's unethical, and I think it's exploiting people who deserve to be compensated fairly for their work. But there are definitely others, but those are the two big ones.
I've seen those, and I find it interesting that you're bringing those up, because it's questions that come in my mind of, is this becoming more normal? Has this been accepted? Is this just now like clickbait, right? Is this
Yeah.
something in the field where it's just kind of like, okay, it's a new part of our job, or some people do it and we kind of just look the other way. So it's I'm happy that you brought that up, because I'm sure a lot of people have those questions too, even if they're just starting off of, should I be accepting this work if my goal is this, or, I feel funny about it, should I say no? So I'm happy that you brought that up. Let's move on to I guess a more positive one to go back into. Um, you've gotten mentoring from other experienced copywriters. You're now doing some mentoring yourself. From all the people you've interacted with, what would you say would be the main attributes that copywriters tend to have?
Well, that's a great question. I think generally self-confidence, which I think initially can sound kind of cheesy, but like if you don't believe in yourself, like why would anyone else believe in you? Like why would they trust you? Like if you go on a discovery call with somebody and they can tell that you're not prepared, or you seem like you don't want to be there. Like I know that appearances of course aren't everything, but you still want to show that you're a professional. And like I know it can be easy, especially when you're starting out, to just kind of make yourself feel kind of small and let clients lead the calls. You have to learn that you're the business owner, you're the professional. You have to lead the conversation. You have to ask the right questions. It's completely okay if they ask questions, but you do have to show that you know what you're doing, because people can tell when you're not being quite truthful with them, or you're hiding something from them, or like you're really desperate for work. But it is really important to just have the confidence that things will be okay, even if the call doesn't go well or if they don't sign. That's completely okay. There are so many other people who need what you do, and there's people out there who are looking for someone just like you. You just have to do the work to put yourself out there and to be able to connect with them, because if you don't put yourself out there, like nobody is going to know you exist and then you're not going to get anywhere, and it's going to be really difficult to grow. So definitely confidence, a lot of self-drive, because especially if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have a team, it's easy to get overwhelmed with everything you have to do. So you have to be driven and you have to be really organized.
I imagine so. So what kind of experience, paid or unpaid, would you suggest someone perhaps take on if they're looking at getting into copywriting, and or someone doing something like yourself, copywriting as a business owner?
I think if you have any type of interest in copywriting, you should go on YouTube and just watch some videos. There are some copywriters that have really great channels, because you can find a lot of written stuff online, but because copywriting is so broad, you have to know a little bit more about it to know exactly what to Google, if that makes sense. But Ashlyn Carter, Alex Catoni, and Sarah Turner, like those are the big three that I can think of off the top of my head that provide a lot of information on YouTube that will kind of tell you like, okay, this person started their own business and now made X amount of money, or like this is what this type of copy is, like this is how you can improve your website copy, for example. They're pretty practical, but they're detailed enough that they can still help you understand what they're talking about. If you are really serious about getting into copywriting, I would suggest investing into some type of course. There's a bunch of different ones. I don't know what the cheapest ones are. Like I know generally like they are pretty pricey, like I think a couple of $1,000s, but they usually offer payment plans, because it is pretty difficult to get into an agency unless you have like a marketing degree or some type of experience, but just get experience from anywhere that you can. Even Upwork, like I don't think Upwork is absolutely terrible. You just have to be really careful. Do
Mhm.
your research about how, like, what type of copy you like to write, and then what is a fair rate for your experience level and whatever the project is, and then try to find projects based on that rather than trying to apply to anything and everything, because there are definitely a lot of scams out there. So you do want to be careful, but because there's so many different directions that you can go in, it's just really nice, and um I think pretty unique compared to most industries. But yeah, there's a lot of podcasts. The Copywriter Club podcast is really great. Amy Porterfield, she's not a copywriter, I think she's technically a digital marketer,
Mhm.
but her podcast is also really great. She also has a lot of free resources. Just find someone that you like, someone who you trust, and then just download all the free resources that they have and just study them. There's a bunch of books out there too. Some of them are still pretty good. But generally, yeah, you just study as much as you can. Maybe find a copywriter somewhere that you know, or someone that you find online, and try to talk to them, because most of them will, because I think most copywriters, especially if they're entrepreneurs too, they understand that starting something new is really scary.
Mhm.
And they'll happily talk to someone, tell them like, okay, this is what I did, this is what I did wrong, this is what you can do. And it's a I think it's a good community. Like if you're interested in it, like you can do a lot of the research yourself, and then I think you'll be able to find somebody that you can talk to that can kind of point you in the right direction, like according to what your interest is and what your goals are.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. You gave us so much great information today. Before we let you go, though, I'd love to give you the floor. If you can just close us off by giving advice to those who are thinking about joining this field. What advice do you have for them?
Oh, it's a great question. I would say do things that make you uncomfortable, because it's very easy to just psych yourself out and say, I'll do this tomorrow. Or I have to do this thing before I do that thing, which I have done myself a lot. But I have absolutely grown a lot just from making myself uncomfortable, because that's really the only way you can grow. Like the first copywriting job that I got that I was outside of Upwork, it was for a modeling job. So like I got paid for the shoot, and then I was paid for to like test out the products. It was like makeup or something. And they were telling me like, oh well, we're gonna, once you finish up with the testing notes, like we'll send it to the copywriter. And I go, oh, I'm a copywriter. I had never said that out loud before. And I had just published my website like 3 days before. So it felt really weird. And I'm like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah, I don't have my business cards with me because I didn't have any. But like, I felt really weird and really uncomfortable talking about that. But they ended up being my longest retainer client for like 6 months. So like, it ended up being really consistent work. And like another example is that my first networking event, I sat in my car and I was trying to talk myself into going, because I didn't know much about the event. Like I knew it was a bunch of like very seasoned business owners, and I had just quit my job like a month ago. So I was really nervous. It's like, well, I'm very inexperienced. Like I'm a lot younger than anybody, that everybody's like, what am I even going to say? So I forced myself to go, even though I didn't want to. Like I made a few connections. I ended up getting some work out of it, and um, I wrote a website for a client that I met there that is now one of my retainer clients that I've had for like a year and a half now. So like you never know what ever you do today is going to take you tomorrow or next week or next year. And if it doesn't, if nothing comes out of it, that's fine. You probably won't even notice. But if it does, then it's gonna make a huge difference. So like you have to be willing to take, I guess, small calculated risks, even though like not necessarily risks. Like you have to do things that feel really uncomfortable, knowing that you have to keep practicing them to get better, to get to the next step of wherever you're going to.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.